Let's convene, and when Robin gets back to her desk, we'll have her call roll. But before we do, Arthur's going to be chairing this meeting. But before he does that, I would like to suggest that we offer a warm round of applause to Adrian and Lydia for attaining office. And even though she's not here, to Heidi and to Arthur for running, which is to be acknowledged. And with that, Arthur, Robin, if you would call roll, and then Arthur will pick up the gavel.
Heidi Emberling, Lynn Philpott, Adrian Fine,
Present.
Co-Chair Dan Garber, Present. Annette Glankoff, here. Jennifer Hederly, here. Hamilton Hitchings, here. Co-Chair Arthur Keller, here. Shawnee Kleinhaus, here. Lydia Koo, here. Steve Levy, Don McDougall, Whitney McNair, Julia Moran, here. Mark Nadim, here. Bonnie Packer, here. Lisa Penske-Cote, Doria Suma, here. Amy Sung, here. Jason Titus, Elaine Wang, here. Ellen Erbrock, here. Alex Van Riesen. Here. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. And I forgot to include in our list Don McDougall, who is not here, but we'll acknowledge him if he comes. Arthur.
Thank you. Our first thing that we have on our agenda is oral communications, and we have two cards. The first card is from Fred Balin. And the microphone is over there.
You'll have 3 minutes.
Good evening. So I'm speaking on the safety element, and specifically you have a policy S3.3 that says continue to work with appropriate agencies to clean up hazardous waste sites and contaminated groundwater. As you may know, hazardous materials have been in the news. There was an article just the other day about how the U.S. Health and Human Services has classified TCE as a carcinogen. It previously has been known to be a cancer-forming substance by all forms of entry by the U.S. EPA, and we have a lot of TCE and other hazardous materials in the ground. The policy here should be changed to not clean up hazardous waste sites, but anywhere where there's hazardous materials in the grounds. We do have policy for how hazardous waste is supposed to be dealt with, I believe, at commercial sites. The specific point I want to mention here is that we had a situation a year ago now where we discovered, or we learned newly, that there was a spill of TCE on a commercial site that was going to be turned into housing. And the Department of Toxic Substances Control received a report, a risk assessment, which they reviewed and had a certain standard that they met. And the applicant felt that standard was sufficient in terms of any mitigation they had to provide, which was to move houses back 50 feet, and that was all they really had to do. We had a consultant that we hired or that we retained to help us in that process and determine what was best. He said that wasn't sufficient. There's higher standards in Mountain View, and he was able to convince a council majority that what was put into place there was not best practice, and council voted to put in what was called sub-slab depressurization. My point is that we need to develop best practices for mitigation of hazardous materials on any site in Palo Alto when there's going to be new construction or either refurbished construction. We should have that in place. We should do the research. We should know what it is. And then we should follow on with some kind of ordinances that require that what we do in mitigating these kinds of circumstances is the best we can do. Our standard in that aspect of mitigation does not have to be what a regulatory agency like the DTSC or the Regional Water Quality Control Board allows in their risk assessment evaluation. It can be what we want to put together. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And the next speaker is Ed Schmidt.
You'll have 3 minutes.
I'd like to make a few comments on discovery of toxic materials. We have been experiencing this around College Terrace. We have developers that go ahead and work with the city. What they do is they examine the particular plot that the building is going on or whatever. But they don't, we don't really extend the limits of what the dangers might be or the dangers in which when excavation occurs, how you can be moving these toxic materials around. They're limited to a little parcel. What happens to the perimeters as they are moving things around within that parcel? We've looked at some groundwater plumes that have occurred over the years from HP on the south side of Page Mill Road, and we can see that the plumes are heading in the direction of College Terrace. And what we would like to do is find out not only what's in the parcel before a builder goes ahead and starts building and construction and demolishing, but what's happening around where there are dwellings and residents outside of that. Because the houses in College Terrace were built 50, 80 years ago. They weren't built with all the protection that the new houses in the development are being built with. Big, thick concrete slabs, vapor depressurization. We just have crawl spaces. So as part of the planning, I think you also have to do the discovery and find out what effect has that site had around the neighborhood as well as within the site that's being prepared for development. Thank you.
Thank you. And next on our agenda are staff comments.
Thank you. Thank you and good evening. First, I want to say thanks to the subcommittee members who've been working so hard on the two elements we're going to discuss this evening with the staff and PlaceWorks staff. We really appreciate all of the effort, and I think it's going to be a good conversation tonight. Then just a heads up that the City Council will be discussing your recommendations regarding the land use element on November 28th is the scheduled date. It's probably going to be a pretty short conversation. I think the council understands that it will really be the next council that makes a decision and gives decisions and gives us direction on policy matters. But we thought we would take the opportunity of this item to give the council members an introduction to all of your work, all of the options that you've put on the table for their consideration, and ask them if we missed any options. So we'll let you know how it goes. I think it's going to be potentially another late night. There are a couple items on the agenda, any one of which could take some time. So, of course, we'd love to have you there, but it's going to happen at this point. The agenda is showing the discussion of the SCAP first, and then land use element. So, it certainly won't be the first item on the agenda as I originally hoped. Then after that, we're going to go back to the council at the end of January, and that date is still a little bit up in the air, but it'll be towards the end of the month, because remember they asked, when they reviewed transportation, they asked us to bring back transportation and land use together. And so that will be a significant meeting that you might want to put on your schedules once we have a date, because we'll be asking the council at that time to review both of those elements and to give us some pretty good direction on the options that you've outlined, and any significant changes or challenges they see with those two, really the key pieces of the comp plan update. So I'll let you know more as we have a schedule for that, and look forward to your your thoughts and input on that date if you can make it. Last point, please notice that the next meeting is on December 13th, so it's a week earlier than usual, and I hope you can all make an effort to be there. We would like to have a special meal, not just to celebrate the holidays, but to thank those of the committee members who will not be continuing with us. So if you can make an effort to be there and spread the word, I think it'll be fun. Thanks, that's all.
Thank you. So hopefully you won't suffer from triskaidekaphobia. So if you if you were on the natural environment element, if you can turn your tags up so that I can call on you first.
And Arthur, Joanna is going to give the staff introduction to the element.
Okay, great. Then we'll do that. Thank you.
Thank you. So you have tonight, we're going to be looking at two elements, the natural environment element first, and then the safety element. This is your third meeting on the natural environment element, and we've had 3 subcommittee meetings as well on the element. At our last subcommittee meeting, we were also joined by some city staff departmental experts, including from the Urban Forestry Department, the Chief Sustainability Officer, and also the manager from the Open Space, Parks, and Golf Department. So we've just want to emphasize that this version of the element that you have in front of you incorporates changes not only from your subcommittee members, but also from departmental staff that have reviewed this and have been helping us out at our subcommittee meetings. So looking first at the natural environment element and goal 1, open space, and I just want to acknowledge that the staff report in one section uses incorrect goal numbers, so I apologize for that and any confusion you might have experienced. But goal 1 is about open space, and the biggest thing we talked about under this goal was really the need to beef up principles of connectivity and to really see open space and creek corridors and parks and street trees and all of these different elements of the city's ecosystem as an interconnected system and really take advantage of those that connectivity. So one of the important ways that we talked about doing that was adding a map that's been developed as part of the Open Space, Parks, Trails, and Recreation Master Plan, which is called a Natural Systems Map. So page 1 of that map was in your packet, but we realized that it should have had another page. So in your At Places stack, you should have 2 pages of this map. So the map looks like this, and the other page includes a legend, which is always helpful with a map. And that map emphasizes that kind of connectivity between the foothills and the bay, and connectivity for a whole range of species. And so that was really not only in this goal itself, but also if you looked in your staff report, a number of the policies and programs were modified to really make sure that that point is made about connectivity and the city kind of being on a continuum here. In addition, we added some clarity about how to determine what are special status species that the city needs to protect, and added some detail about that. Added a new program about acquisition opportunities and making sure that the city is positioned to take advantage of those opportunities swiftly when they arise. And then we had removed some of the detail about the foothills development criteria because that has been added to the zoning ordinance since the current comp plan was drafted. But in the subcommittee, we heard that maybe we should add some of that detail back in just to make sure that we have a sound policy basis for those zoning changes. So we have done that. Goal number 2 about creeks and riparian corridors was really benefited, I think, from some input from the subcommittee that led us to do a little bit of reorganization under this goal. I think what we realized, but what was not really coming through, was that there are pretty different conditions in the upper reaches of Palo Alto's creeks, where there are still some segments with relatively natural stream bank conditions and plenty of space on either side of the creek. And that's a very different condition than you find further down in the flatlands, where a lot of the times the creeks have been channelized. They're serving kind of more of a flood control role than a habitat role at this point in time. And so while we can have certainly aspirations for the entire length of a creek in terms of its habitat value and its the degree of protection that it should merit, probably those different creeks are going to be treated differently, and there's maybe different possibilities for them going forward. So that goal has been reorganized so that more natural creeks are addressed kind of in the first half of the policies and program, and the second half tends to do more with creeks that are more urbanized and channelized and what we can do with those types of creeks. Goal number 3 has to do with the urban forest and the understory. One of the changes here was really to make sure that other benefits of the urban forest were acknowledged, including in particular our urban forester who was present stressed the importance of the public health benefits of the urban forest. And so we added some terminology about that, as well as the urban forest role as part of the city's green infrastructure network. We talked a little bit about the appropriate goal of canopy cover, and I know that's something that you also received comments on. The Urban Forest Master Plan refers to canopy cover equity across the city and no net loss of canopy at the neighborhood level, and so we added some language to be consistent with the Urban Forest Master Plan. We also, in a couple of different places, revised language that has to do with maintenance of trees, the care of trees on both public and private property, as well as enforcement of penalties for people who don't retain trees or comply with the city's rules about which trees should be preserved. We discussed that the Tree and Landscape Technical Manual is actually in the process of being updated right now. So that's going to be a really important resource going forward, in particular to help provide some clarity on which trees are protected and at what maturity and of which species, et cetera, as well as to provide guidance about landscaping, including on both public and private property. So we revised some programs to reflect that ongoing update of the Tree and Landscape Technical Manual. And then finally, another thing to mention is just that we did add a policy about the importance of soils and all of the different roles that soil plays in both the natural and the built environment in Palo Alto, and making sure that that is protected and respected. And then goal number 4 was the last goal that we dealt with in our most recent round of revisions. That has to do with water resources. So right now that section is as distinct from the water supply and infrastructure related facets of water, which are addressed in the safety element in the infrastructure section. So this water resources section really focuses on water quality, water's value kind of as a natural resource, both for humans and for plants and animals. And we didn't make as too extensive of changes to this goal, but this has strengthened a number of policies and programs, clarified coordination with regulatory agencies, again, noted the connection with the ongoing update of the Tree and Landscape Technical Manual, particularly in encouraging least toxic kind of landscaping and landscape maintenance practices. This section also was a place where we added one additional policy and program regarding basement dewatering and its potential impacts on water as a resource. So a new policy to reduce discharge from basement dewatering into the bay, and a program to explore ways to monitor dewatering and potentially charge a fee based on the amount of water discharged. And then finally, we moved a policy about utilizing and retaining rainwater on site from the safety element, where it was in the infrastructure section, to this goal and 4 in the natural environment element. So those are some of the changes in terms of outstanding issues in open space. One of the, we talked about, I'd mentioned the natural systems map already. Another idea that was brought up was about additional habitat protections. And in some surrounding communities use something like a habitat overlay zone. In Palo Alto, you have currently the Site and Design Review Combining District. So that could potentially be used as a tool, is already a tool to ensure that development will be harmonious with other uses and compatible with environmental and ecological objectives. So we added a program to this goal to consider expanding the use of that district as a habitat protection tool. We talked about creek setbacks, and this kind of goes into the issue that I was raising earlier in terms of whether or not there should be a single number of feet for a creek setback for the entire length of a creek, or whether that setback might vary based on whether or not there is a natural versus an urbanized channel with development already encroaching. and how the stream protection ordinance handles that issue. We did add a program to regularly update the stream protection ordinance since we want to make sure that we're staying on top of these issues. And I think that's it. I think I've touched on the other issues already that are mentioned in your staff report. So I'll stop there for the natural environment element.
Thank you. So first we'll go to Shani. Microphone, please.
Thank you. I submitted a couple of documents and I have quite a lot of comments. And I hope some of those can get into the next draft. I think that overall staff did an amazing job of including a lot of what we commented on, but I do feel that I don't feel that this is ready to go at all. I think it needs a lot more work, potentially because it has several required elements in it. Anyway, I don't know if I want to read all of that. Everybody should have my comments. One of the things about endangered species, I really think that we should have ways to pursue opportunities to enhance and expand habitat for endangered and rare species. And the other thing is that we talked about what constitutes a rare or endangered species, and staff proposed using the NCCDB database. NCC is a national, I don't remember, but anyway, it's a database by the Department of Fish and Game. I think we should include all the lists of species that I included here, whether they're special concern, first, second, and third priority, state endangered, state threatened, the bird of conservation concerns of different types, endangered species list on federal level, North American Conservation Initiative list, watch list, Audubon list, and the Native Plant Society list. I think most of this will really only apply to anything that happens in our open spaces, not really in the urban areas. But I do think we should recognize all these species because they're declining, if not already disappearing. And with what is going to happen to them when the federal protections disappear soon, that would be, at least we might have refuge for some of those species. So I suggest several programs and policies to add or some things to remove. Some things I didn't understand in program 1.8.1, which is N17. I wasn't sure about the language and I proposed some alternatives because I don't think we have effluent flows from the Water Pollution Control Plan to the ITT marsh now. So I wasn't clear what it meant, so I suggested different language. I think the thing that one of the things I'm most concerned with is the creek ordinance. I think the creek ordinance that was developed is not consistent with the existing general plan. And I'm not comfortable with changing the general plan to fit an ordinance that does not fit with the previous general plan. So I think we should retain the 100-feet setback in the properties that it mentions east of Foothill Expressway and modify and then do all the studies that are proposed here rather than just say, okay, the ordinance is fine, we will continue to look into that. I find it very upsetting that Palo Alto has regulation that's not as good as San Jose or the county for natural streams. And I understand that it's different when you have a stream that's in a concrete channel, but at least for the areas that we still have natural streams, I think we should keep that. And I would even add a program to identify, and I suggested to consolidate N2.9.1 and N9.2, which are N13.9 and 40. I found those really confusing, and I thought we should just say develop a comprehensive riparian corridor preservation, restoration, enhancement plan for Palo Alto creeks and identify stretches to preserve or restore, standards to be achieved, and sources of funding. So that really simplifies those two programs and consolidates them. there are a few other things. One of them is that we don't have a plan to protect burrowing owls and return them to Bixby, so that could go under an enhancement program, maybe even the airport. I think we should accept all of Catherine Martineau's comments regarding the Urban Forest Master Plan. And another thing is under 4, water resources. The goal, if I read it, is water resources that are managed to sustain plant and animal life, support urban activities, and protect public health and safety. But none of the policies or programs addresses the managed to sustain plant and animal life. During the last drought, we experienced huge loss of plant and animal life in Palo Alto and anywhere else in the county. So if we're going to manage water resources, we should take that into consideration and find ways and maybe have another policy and program. Policy would be to sustain animal and plant life during drought years, and a program to figure out how to do that. So I would like to see that added to water resources. God. I think I'm going to come back to some things later.
Thank you. Next is Doria, and as long as we're doing congratulations on being appointed to the Planning and Transportation Commission.
Thank you very much. Okay, well, Shani covered a lot of things, actually. I would like to associate myself with her comments, especially about creek setbacks, which was not something I knew much about, and it was kind of a little bit of a difficult discussion at the last subcommittee meeting because it's such a built-out city. But given that we have other aspirational sort of goals, and we use grandfathering to protect already existing things, I think we could do more with the creek setbacks and protecting people's property rights through grandfathering. I certainly think we should take all of Catherine Martineau's suggestions very seriously. I think we got a lot in here, and it's good. I do think it was hard to go over these two elements just in the time allotted, especially the safety one had more in it than I thought I was going to be interested in. So about trees, I think I'm going to speak in generalities. I think we need to more protection for certain sizes and species of trees. And I think when we talk about having parity in tree canopy across neighborhoods, I don't think we don't want to just not lose anymore. I think we want to acknowledge that some neighborhoods are already at a deficit, and so they need improvement. We got some about soil health in here, which was also kind of a new thing for me to think about outside of my own backyard, and I think we could emphasize that more. I also think there should be a program that helps people in drought years understand the importance of watering. It's not to keep on the days that you're allowed. It's not really to keep your lawn alive. It's to keep the trees alive, because the lawn will come back. It's not precious. And also the bees, it really helps honeybees. If you don't have water for honeybees, they will all die, because they line up in my bird baths. It's cute. So, and I also think there should be a specific program to emphasize the importance of backyard habitat and to help people, residents, understand more how to do that. What else did I have? And I agree that there are things that we think we have covered by ordinances, but ordinances can change, councils can decide to lose them. So I think if we want to keep the general policies to protect these things, we should put it in the comp plan even, and we can make a reference to it. We don't have to go into detail, but the general goal should be there. So that's it for now.
Thank you, and from now on, we'll do 3 minutes per person. And why don't we start on this end with, Jennifer, sorry. Jennifer, you can have the same amount of time, so you're not limited to 3 minutes, sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, I don't need 3 minutes. I actually wanted to commend staff. I think our discussion in the subcommittee there was a lot of thematic stuff that covered a lot of cross-cutting policies and programs, and I thought you did a really excellent job of sorting it out and putting it in an understandable fashion, so I want to thank you for that. That being said, I do support Shani's comments for the most part, including, I think the one in her written comments that didn't get mentioned was integrating the Parks Master Plan and the Urban Forest Master Plan to provide functional wildlife corridors, as shown in that map. And anybody who didn't find the map, second page of the map, it's over there with the legend, yeah. And what else? I like the idea of a policy about expanding habitat for endangered and rare species. I think the creek setback issue is very complicated, and I don't claim to fully understand it because I too don't really know what's in the creek ordinance beyond the 50-foot setback, but I do think it's problematic that we've had a comp plan policy for quite some time that called for 100 feet and enacted an ordinance that didn't. So I think maybe we need to have some discussion about what to do about that as opposed to just letting it go. That's it.
Thank you. So let's, for a change, start on this end. Councilmember-elect Fine.
Thank you. So just two quick comments. I agree with a lot of what others have said. I think staff did a great job here. There is some work to be done on some of the canopy issues that Catherine Martineau brought up. Just on the outstanding 4 goals here. So one is on the goal N1, open space. It's speaking a little bit about connectivity. We also may want to emphasize accessibility of park spaces, whether that's physical access or access in terms of shade structures, things like that. And then on the canopy protection issue, I was trying to figure out if the tree canopy cover equity just meant overall coverage, which we probably don't want. We probably do want it by either segmented by neighborhood or by some region across the city. But that was my only comment there. Otherwise, I thought this is pretty close, and I appreciated all the comments from down the line here, too.
So good evening, everybody. I thought that this is an amazing section where it covers so much, especially that we continue to protect the open space that we treasure so much. I just wanted to have a quick comment about the dewatering. I think that it's important that we recognize that water is a precious resource and that is precious everywhere. While we are concerning the dewatering from excavation of basements, we do want to focus on solutions of what do we do with this dewatering and such that give it the flexibility of a basement construction, because I do think that down the road that we could potentially looking more and more underground garage construction, and I think that needs to have some flexibilities there. Policy 4.6 is talking about the rainwater, and I think that is an excellent starter. But I actually wanted to talk a little more about water. Moving forward, that we understand that the changes are coming, and we need to find ways to find a sustainable way to have water. So while we have this water treatment facility in Palo Alto, maybe we need to invest more to see how we can recycle and reuse the water that we have, that considering the drought that we endure, which that we forecast is going to be here to stay. So maybe we need to find ways to make water work harder. Thank you.
Councilmember-elect Koo.
Have to get used to that. Thank you. So I agree with most of what Shani, Doria, and Jennifer has said already. In terms of the setback for the creek, I think that there does need to be a setback square footage, and then moving on to program R161. It's the list of the ones that Shani had mentioned about the different the list of special status species in Palo Alto for the different kind of trees. I was just wondering, where would that be housed at? You know, where is that list going to be? How is it updated, and where is it going to be housed at? Is it in the comp plan itself with a link, or is it somewhere else? And then the next one is policy N1.10. So this one here actually has programs and policy that emphasizes land acquisition, and I would like to also to have the have staff and everybody else consider certain undedicated parklands that are here in Palo Alto already, and we can certainly go through that list and identify which ones they are. Things like the Renzo wetlands, there's the Los Altos treatment plant site, there's even Winter Lodge, Gamble House Gardens, the Water Well Park on Alma and Hawthorne, the community gardens right back over here. So there's quite a bit of undedicated parkland that we can take into consideration as an acquisition and put that as a program in here. Also, all the public benefit from PCs, you know, I don't know if they're open space or they're park, but we should also find a way of identifying which ones, where they are, and kind of have a consolidated means of knowing which ones are public benefits from these PCs. And also directing how we can use it. For example, Alma Village, which is a PC, they have a community center or a room that is out for public use, but nobody knows how to get to it. I think that needs to be better defined. So then there is also I think on this section, urban forest and understory, policy N3.2. I think there's a wording in there at the very end which says and an attractive visual character and should be protected. I think the word should be changed to must. And I think that's it for this part for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen.
Well, I'm enormously impressed with the subcommittee's work, what they're doing, and they seem all of them so qualified, which I personally am not, and would like to depend on their guidance and accept it. What I want to suggest, however, is that you look again at the vision and the introduction there. The vision, I think, is written pretty well, and I've made only a few tightening comments on it. But the introduction, I have cut to about maybe 150 words there. And I think the introduction is really, should be very overall and convey the what's behind it in the index, and so that those who want to know more turn it over and go down to what section is of appeals to them. It isn't very readable now, and you don't know what you're going to get into. So I made some comments for you, and I'll give it to the staff because it's a word problem, and the ability to condense big ideas in brief executive summaries as the introduction. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark.
So I agree with what was covered earlier. My only comment is open space was not adequately covered in this document, especially if it is about a third the area of Palo Alto. Even the map that was provided really covers that whole third of the city in an inset. It's a small small section of the city. So I would like to see a lot more. I mean, that area, the west of 280, to be more covered in more detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Annette.
Okay, thank you. Actually, I think the comments that Doria and Shani made were really brilliant, and the one I particularly like is developing a policy on backyard habitat. That being said, I just have a few comments. One is a question. I'm not sure how wild animals could ever be prohibited from feeding in open spaces. So I think we might want to change the words on that. That came out, that's an,
There is an ordinance that people cannot feed animals in open.
oh, to feed animals, okay.
So humans can't feed animals, but animals can feed themselves.
I see. Well, maybe someone should look at the wording. There was a thing a while ago about noise in open space, and I don't know if that's covered in some other master plan or whatever, but I think that may be really interesting. There was a big deal about having boom boxes and loud music at Foothill Park, so that might be added. Not for the comp plan, but I'm really concerned after listening to Monday night. We're talking about acquiring parkland, and we have a great park PF space available to in Ventura, Bulware Park, and there was some discussion about, when the price comes up, the city should acquire it. So I think we should just jump on that immediately. There is no policy that I saw, maybe this is in the Urban Forest Master Plan, to replace aging trees in Palo Alto, since a number of them were planted at the turn of the century, and I've heard lots of people say, let's replace 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, so I don't want that idea to get lost. Again, maybe that is somewhere else. Probably the only other comment that I really have is there was quite a bit of discussion 2 years back about, and I'd like to see this be a policy, about a plan for a memorial park, a memorial area in parks to plant trees to honor people that have performed significant community services. And that's supposed to be ongoing. And I don't know where it is right now, but I think it's a lovely idea. So I would like to see that program be in there to develop an area for a memorial tree planting with criteria. And let's see. And then I just had some wordsmith on this permeable surface area. I think we should incent people to use permeable surfaces where they are using paving rather than just some weak word like promote. You see so much concrete that it would really be great if we could really almost do something a little stronger. So thanks.
Thank you. Hamilton?
And I'm going to just point out that in Menlo Park, they have some parking lots where they actually have permeable asphalt, so it prevents the runoff. My comments are going to be focused on flood. The flood aspects of the natural element. If we look at policy N2-8, ensure adequate flood control by use of low impact restoration strategies. I would recommend removing by use of low impact restoration strategies because sometimes many of the flood improvements are not restoration strategies, and sometimes they may not be low impact, although we want to minimize those. For example, replacing the bridges is the biggest win. It's a high impact and it's not a restoration strategy. To achieve 50-year flood protection, certain sections of the bank need to be raised, and those are not restoration strategies, although I believe they're not very big sections to do only 50-year, but that's not low impact. The next is N2-7, this 100-foot setback. It's a little bit hard, so my comments are just going to be general, and they may not be very well informed, but certainly below Middlefield, as you get towards the bay, it's impossible to have a 100-foot setback. Palo Alto Ave runs right next to that, so I just don't see how it's applicable below. Okay. And then the last one is section 291. I would add at the end of that, and where that will not reduce flood protection, because we want to be careful about not making the flood problem worse. Thank you.
Thank you, Hamilton. Alex?
Hi. I just wanted to add the agreement with the reinstating the 100-foot setback on the creeks. I want to also echo the backyard habitat. I noticed, I read through and I may have missed it, but there used to be a plan or a program in the city where they combined with Santa Clara to allow people to redo their backyards and reimburse them for that. I don't know how we could include that in this, but it was very successful. My wife jumped on it, and our backyard is now different. But it struck me that it would also be a way to get natural habitat plants. We could actually build that into that plan where we actually encourage people to use natural habitat plants and encourage the growth and development of that in our area. But I didn't know where to put that, but some kind of program for matching funds or some help to change backyard habitat. So I just wanted to agree with that.
Thank you. I think that program is Cash for Grass, which referred to getting rid of lawns, although with the passing of prohibition, that might mean something else now.
Yeah.
Can I add one?
Sure, go ahead,
Can I
Jennifer.
go out of line for a second? I forgot to mention, I did see that there's a policy or a program in there now that seeks funding to significantly increase tree canopy, but I am one of those who is quite disappointed that the Urban Forest Master Plan abandoned the increased canopy by 50% goal. I would love to see the comp plan include some quantitative aspirational goal for increasing canopy. I think it's pretty sad for us to lay out a comp plan that says our goal is no net loss, but yet we have so many policies citywide that show such strong commitment to trees. I think that we should put something in there.
Thank you. Elaine?
A couple general comments. I think just looking out ahead in terms of usability of the document. I think with every element, it would be great just to have that quick hit index, and with not just with the goals, but as long as you can drill down a little bit, maybe one level deeper, just so we can kind of understand the totality of each element in one single page. And that's very helpful. I found that very helpful with land use and with transportation, and going forward doing that. I do worry a little bit, and this is just a question back to staff, what is the right balance for the comp plan? I would worry that maybe we might be drilling down too deeply with some things. So I just want to make sure that we're consistent, that these are policies, goals, aspirations, and not too bogged down, because again, with the usability, we've all talked a lot about with other elements just how heavy they are, with how much information they are, and from a usability perspective, I think the more we put in there, the harder it's and the less accessible it's going to be. That said, I think generally the open space sections are pretty good. I am a little bit worried about the creek setback, and I do think it needs some more study before we just say that we do 100-foot setback. Especially, they're not many, but it looks like, just looking at the map pretty carefully, there are a couple of areas where, like Matadero Creek and maybe even Adobe Creek, run through neighborhoods, and there might be some very shallow lots. And so any resident who lives right up against a creek and has a 100-foot setback, we have to be concerned about that being a taking. And then also on the, I do echo, and like Catherine Martineau's comments on canopy, I do also wonder if there is, because, and this may not necessarily be a policy, but I've also just heard in some conversations that there might be some differential tree strategies. So no net loss might be an acceptable strategy for North Palo Alto, where the tree canopy is a little bit more fleshed out, but some augmentation or a net positive addition to tree canopy for some of the southern neighborhoods might be. And so maybe there's some way to make that a little bit more nuanced between, given the different areas of the city. And so I'm wondering if that's something that we can put back into the pieces with respect to urban forest.
Thank you. Julia?
So first, I agreed with Ellen. I think the vision and introduction can use some cleaning up. The first sentence of the vision isn't really necessary, and half the introduction. There's also a lot of the introduction talks about just the structure of this section, which hopefully we've covered in the introduction to the entire comp plan. So it's just a little too verbose. Then it seems like there's a little confusion with the wild and domestic animals part. I'm wondering if we can just put all animals or just animals, so that there's no, worrying about how that's defined.
Shani, could you put that on the microphone, please?
there is an ordinance already that prohibits feeding of wildlife and domestic animals in parks and open space.
So it's to be consistent with.
So the ordinance has been developed because ducks at Duck Point, for example, were developing diseases because people were feeding them. There are too many of them. They're getting this duck diseases and dying. For the domestic animals, the main reason is that people were creating cat feeding stations in areas that cats don't belong. So that was the motivation for putting both of those. I think it's better to keep it that way, but that's up to you if you want.
Okay. Yeah, I don't have a strong opinion on it. In policy N110, it talks about the regional and sub-regional areas in Skyridge to San Francisco Bay. I think it should also include our north and south neighbors so that we make sure we're connecting with the Baylands with those neighbors. In policy N2.2, there's a point under the program there, or I guess program N2.2.1, carefully design any lighting within natural riparian corridors to avoid impacts on wildlife. I think we should also include safety and to make sure that we're being aware of safety with regard to lighting in that as well. And program N3.4.2 regards to education for city staff, property owners, developers, we need to include renters. So earlier Doria had said something about residents. Maybe we just change it to residents so that renters are included. And one other thing, nothing in here that I saw talks about public edible trees and plants. I know there's a lot of foraging in the Baylands for fennel. There's olive trees. There's, an avocado tree in Johnson Park. I don't have an opinion about whether we should be encouraging or discouraging that, but I think we should be including something about the edible plants within our natural environment as well, because people do eat them. And then I would just second what Doria said about the tree canopy in regards to parity of the neighborhoods, and just that I want to make sure that those South Side neighborhoods are boosting their tree levels, and also agree with Shani on the water resources. I didn't even notice that it wasn't taking the drought years and protecting water and plants and animals into consideration, but I think it's clear that should be added.
Thank you. Bonnie.
A lot of good stuff here, a lot of good comments. One of the things, though, I got confused reading the open space, different policies, because I thought there was a little bit of slippery language in terms of when you're talking about what's really zoned open space, and then there's a reference to private open space. And so I think we need look carefully at the language and make sure we're applying it appropriately to the right kinds of land. And what we didn't have the advantage of is what we have in the existing comp plan is a narrative that talks about what this open space section is referring to and what it is not referring to. Because in the community services element, we have a whole area about our parks, our recreational parks. So I think it needs to be clear that here we're talking about something other than the parks like Mitchell Park, Rinconada, the more urban parks, because we're not trying to make those into natural habitats. We could, but I mean, it's not the major purpose of the parks. So I think that would really help define, because I read one part, encourage the management of private open space. It said golf courses, yards. So I thought, my yard? Do I have to worry? Well, I do have wildlife in my yard, but I mean, I don't encourage the raccoons there. So it's just a little definitional thing would, I think, really help. And so when, Lydia, you were talking about acquiring land for parks, that's covered in the community services element when we talk about parks. Acquisition for open spaces and other things. I just think we have to separate it so we know what we're talking about. I agree with the concept, it's just definitional. And I have a question for you, Shani, about balancing the recreational uses over open space when people bring their dogs. How does that affect the wildlife? I'm always concerned about the dogs on the levees and all the ducks and the, is there a problem that we need to address? Yeah, and you may be the person who could help answer that. But maybe when we get to that. So, and the other thing, in the water resources, and then we have the whole water section and the safety element, there seems to be a lot of overlap because we're concerned about pollution, and pollution is talked about in safety, and we're also concerned about it in the water. So I don't know how to handle that, and something the committees may want to look at the big water picture, because there's some repetition there. And maybe we just need one thing that's water, and don't try to put, just choose an element that it goes in. I don't know if it's so much safety as it is natural. The natural environment, and put all that water stuff that's in safety into natural, and then you don't have repetition and redundancies. What else did I have? Oh, I had a couple of editorial things about one of the things in the tree section said require all new construction to put in street trees. I thought the city is responsible for street trees, and I thought it was a little, the way it was worded was a bit over much. Okay.
Do you want to finish?
Well, and there is already a policy that says you can't destroy, you can't remove the street trees, you have to protect them. So if there's new construction, I don't know if it's already in the ordinance that you have to deal with the street trees, but you don't require the developer to put in the street trees, they're already there. And the irrigation systems. And the way it was worded, it sounded like if somebody remodels a home, they have to be concerned about the street tree that's in front of their house and provide the irrigation for it. The way it's worded. And I don't think that's the intent. So that was my...
Thank you. I think first let Shani respond to that, the question, and then you can talk, Annette. Let's...
The issue of dogs is definitely a concern, and some areas dogs are not allowed. In Palo Alto, dogs are allowed on all the trails. Unfortunately, people take them off leash. As long as they are on the leash, it's not such a big deal. So maybe we need better enforcement, and then maybe that should be something that enforce the laws of how to behave in natural areas so you do not disrupt the wildlife. At Shoreline Park, for example, dogs are not allowed at all. And the reason there is that a lot of the wildlife along the bay nest on the ground. And so if you have dogs, even if they're on a leash, and sometimes people that have them off the leash, those animals, the rabbits over there, in Palo Alto, I don't think you'll see them a lot anymore. The animals that use the baylands, most of them are, at least during reproduction and otherwise, are on the ground. I don't know that we can prohibit that, but we could potentially identify some trails that don't have, although, not all the levees have recreation on them. So I think we have some sort of a balance, but more enforcement would be a good thing. I wouldn't try to kick people out of there, but there is a Palo Alto group that is looking at allowing more dog recreation off leash in natural areas, and I would not be supportive of that.
Thank you. So what we're going to do is we're going first Dan, and then I will speak, and then you can put up your signs if you'd like to talk again. Co-Chair Dan.
Thank you. Suggestion on policy N3.12 regarding soils. In the second sentence, the list of healthy soils that are necessary to filter air and water and sustain plants, etc., you might consider also including the importance of soils to absorb water, and flood water in particular. It acts as a reservoir that helps us moderate the impacts of flood and seawater rise, etc., and rain. Regarding policy N 4.5 on dewatering, my suggestion there is that it's much too narrow. I'll make the following suggestions. You can consider them. rather than the wording that's there now, consider the policy worded like this: conserve and maintain subsurface water resources. And in that way, it includes basements, underpasses, commercial and institutional buildings, residential, but it includes the entire set of built things that we have that have impact on our subsurface water resources. Then you could consider several programs underneath that. Research and develop programs that reduce the depletion of our subsurface water resources resulting from the built and construction of our built environment. A program that would research and develop better understanding of our subsurface water ecosystem, including flows, what its actual geography is, and the impacts of other natural issues related to that ecosystem. A program to research and develop programs that can recharge our subsurface water resources when they have been depleted, and which they are now, and that allows us to then start talking about the role of our wastewater treatment plant and its potential use for its wastewater, as well as how we use water that comes out of construction and finding ways to get that back into the aquifer as opposed to out into the bay. At any rate, I think there's an opportunity to broaden this and be far more impactful in our larger community rather than just a certain portion of it. Thank you.
Thank you. So a couple things. First of all, I agree that it makes sense to have some aspirational goals, but they should be labeled as aspirational goals. We should be clear which ones are aspirational and which ones are required in terms of policies, and that required policies should have priority over aspirational ones in general. Just a comment about parkland. One of the things that we're at risk for is losing community gardens that are in private hands. For example, there's one behind the Midtown Shopping Center that is at risk of being lost. I think that somebody just bought that or is in the process of buying it, and that's something that should be retained for community use. We lost a community garden on East Meadow, for example, by the church near on Middlefield, at Middlefield and East Meadow. In terms of creeks, there's really three kinds of creeks. There are natural rural creeks for which big setbacks make sense. There are suburban natural creeks for which big setbacks do not make sense. For example, San Francisco Creek, along where there's houses right along it, basically east of Alma does not make sense for big setbacks. You essentially have to destroy a row of homes to do that, and that's not feasible. In addition, parts of Madero Creek and Barron Park, that does not make sense to have big setbacks. There are homes right up against that, and therefore some allowance for that makes sense. Then there are channelized creeks. Now, I remember when the stream protection ordinance was put into effect, one of the council members said, well, we should have big setbacks behind channelized creeks because we might get rid of the channels and restore it to a riparian corridor. That makes absolutely no sense, and requiring building restrictions of 100 or 50 feet setbacks when there's a channel there, that channel is going to stay there in perpetuity. And therefore, setbacks only make sense to the extent of protecting the integrity of the creek, of the channel wall. And that doesn't mean 20 feet or 30 feet or 50 feet. It means relatively small. One of the things interesting that came out of the tree removal at Castellea was that, in fact, only the property owner may appeal the removal of a tree. The neighborhood communities have no say of a removal of a protected tree. That's crazy. We should have a say of a removal of a protected tree. The public, the neighbors, should have a say over that. I think that should be something that there should be appealable. In addition, there should be a notion of additional protected trees. Other cities have more trees than simply one kind of oak and redwoods, so that makes sense. And one of the things in terms of North Palo Alto and South Palo Alto, one of the key differences between North Palo Alto and South Palo Alto and trees is that in North Palo Alto, the plantings are in a strip by the street, and in South Palo Alto, we tend to have rolled curbs, and the trees are further inward towards the property. And that means that you have trees with smaller canopies, and they tend to be spaced further apart. So we might think about things, for example, if you look along University Avenue, there are these trees in the right-of-way separating parking. And we might think about having those along in South Palo Alto to try to increase the canopy so that we can have trees that are larger because they're further away from the homes. And I think that that would add additional character to the neighborhood. In terms of dewatering, the description here in N45, I agree with the comments of Dan. But what's interesting here is it says reduce the discharge of residential basement dewatering and other excavations into the bay. It's not that the water goes into the bay that's the problem. It's the water is coming out of the ground that's the problem. The focus of this is exactly wrong. It's not getting the water out in the first place. Where you put it, I mean, obviously you could figure out ways to do better things with the water, but getting out of the ground in the first place for the purposes of constructing a basement, there are better ways to construct basements that we should use rather than extracting water. And also, I think that rather than extracting water for constructing basements and then putting it wherever you put it, whether it's down the storm drains or whether it's watering, picking it up to water trees elsewhere, it's kind of hard at the rate at which the water is being extracted to actually pump it back in the ground. You can't. That's not feasible. So that easily. So we need to think about what makes sense there. Also, in terms of the regional water quality control plant. One of the things that came up when we were talking about the emergency water supply is we have this wonderful large reservoir underneath El Camino Park. Yeah. We also have some wells, primarily in North Palo Alto. Those wells, if we activated them, would remove water, a significant amount of water from the aquifer, potentially causing compaction and settling. Why not, and those have to be treated anyway in order to pump into our water supply. Why not use a second treatment on the regional water quality control plant, and in emergencies, use that to feed into our water supply rather than extracting it from the aquifer. I think that would have less impact on our aquifer, and I think that's something that should be considered. And finally, there's something about, we should think about xeriscaping. That is using native plants that have low water use. And I think that there should be specific mention of that. And I think that there should be a prohibition against using grass in new commercial construction, in new commercial areas. In the research park, they should figure out ways of putting other xeriscaping treatments or things like that, rather than large expanses of lawn that will just soak up water. I think that when they do new construction, no grass, xeriscaping instead. I think that certainly makes sense in the research park. I think it's less enforceable in residential areas, especially for single-family residential. I think that makes a lot of sense. And now we have a few other people who want to talk, and so we will go to Annette.
Well, my comments really aren't comp plan related, but I have to say something about the canopies, which I agree with a lot of the statements we've had. So they've just recently been cutting the trees in my neighborhood. They have taken away over 50% of the canopies. It's just amazing to me to see these poor little trees almost denuded. So that is really a hot button for me. Also, I think a lot of the issues with planting trees, besides what Arthur said, is that we need to change, I don't think it's zoning, it's in the building codes, that prohibit planting trees really close to driveways or utility outlets. I think it's the kind of tree that we should be selecting that have roots that go down rather than spread out. So I think that when you guys start consolidating all these things for zoning and building, that is something that is really, really important to me, is to also make sure that when a neighborhood or canopy wants to plant street trees, that it is mandatory for a owner to have these street trees. mean, one of the things that we had was an incredible, we planted 10 trees on our street. It was an incredible problem to get people to agree to plant trees. And it wasn't mandatory, and we couldn't force them. And so if you look in South Palo Alto, I know that's the case with a lot of, especially some of the folks that are moving in that like very clean lines and elegance. And so anyway, it's a real button of mine, some of these building zoning codes that I think we could really change that would impact the tree canopy, especially in South Palo Alto. And I could go on and on about this, but I'll just stop because this is one of my buttons. So thank you for letting me vent.
Sure. Hamilton?
Sure. I agree with Arthur's comment. I love Arthur's comment about being creative about ways to use the treatment plant water for emergency water. Those wells are also for emergency, and so we probably don't want to take them offline, but it would clearly be preferable to use the emergency treatment plant. I also want to make a follow-up comment about the 100-foot setback that ties into Arthur's comments. I don't think on San Francisco Creek, once you get past El Camino, that the 100-foot setback, first of all, most of the creek in the urban area from basically from El Camino to 101, I don't think the 100-foot setback is practical. And I also don't want it to be a stealth way of blocking, flood control improvements. We're not talking about doing anything massive there, but there are very specific stretches of the creek where if you don't bring it up like 3 or 4 feet, it's going to cost much higher level of damage than if they essentially plug some of those low spots with impermeable material. So I would like to not have that 100-foot setback for between El Camino and 101. And I just don't think it's practical on San Francisco.
Thank you. Jennifer?
Thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to comment on Chair Garber's suggestion around policy N4.5 about subsurface water. I don't think I caught all the words that you suggested, but I do like the idea of a broader, more general policy about conserving and maintaining subsurface water resources. That being said, I don't think that we should eliminate the program that falls under it. And I think it's appropriate and consistent with the other types of programs that you suggested. So I would make that comment. Also, Co-Chair Keller, in terms of the setback for channelized creeks, you were saying you don't see a purpose in the setback for channelized creeks. I do see a purpose for some setback, not certainly 100 feet. But those channelized creeks, even though they're not naturalized, they are a key habitat corridor for a lot of species because of the water that's there. So I would like to see some kind of setback along those channelized creeks that protects the wildlife, not in terms of building additional habitat alongside necessarily or massive habitat, but you want trees along those creeks and you want some understory and you want conditions that can support the animals that use the water in the creeks.
Thank you. Bonnie?
The last policy under the water resources about retaining and utilizing rainwater, I wonder why the city hasn't thought about offering property owners rain barrels or some kind of catchment. Do we have that? It wasn't referred to here. You can get rain barrels?
Yeah, and that just, you didn't say it on the mic, and that just said that there's a program for giving discounted rain barrels.
Cash for barrels.
Thank you. Doria?
Just a few things. I thought there were a lot of good comments. I did appreciate Jen's last comment, and I emphasized that the channelized creeks are still really important for wildlife. You see them there all the time. And I like the idea of broadening, as Chair Garber said, the idea, but I still want to, I still think we need to do something about addressing basement watering, particularly since there are other methods of construction. I'm certainly no expert on this, but I think we need to look into best practices and be willing to, say it's going to cost a little more if you want to have a basement. I think that's fine. And then I really appreciate Arthur's comments about expanding the protected trees. And also, Annette said something about noise and open space. And I can't remember if this is addressed somewhere else, but it's a good idea. And then also including, changing it from property owners or homeowners or whatever it said to renters to be inclusive.
I think you mean residents,
Residents, what did I say?
renters.
Yeah.
Yes. And if you've already spoken, if you can put your tag down so I can figure out who hasn't spoken. And Shani?
I think that's it.
A lot of good comments. And Arthur, I think it's really important that not only the homeowner can appeal removal of an ancient tree or an important tree and to expand the tree protection. I wanted to answer to Bonnie about the parks in the urban area. The idea that in one of the handouts you have is from the Sierra Club, and they're talking about patches and corridors, about creating a resilient habitat in the city by looking at the parks and increasing the habitat value of parks by planting a few more oaks. It doesn't have to be a huge project. It's just the attitude of how you maintain and what you plant in our parks, and then connecting that with the wildlife corridors or bird corridors, butterfly corridors, pollinator corridors. So those are things that we've talked a lot about in the subcommittee, and the idea in those maps that we just got were to create that system of connectivity. So the urban, we're not trying to look at an urban park and make it into a wildland, but we are thinking about how can you improve that to really create a resilient ecosystem over the entire city landscape in some more hospitable way to birds, to butterflies. So that kind of answers one of the things you brought. And so when you talk about public versus private open space, it was a little confusing to me too, but there are private golf courses, there are other things that we could, and the backyard habitat, which is also something that came from that Sierra Club letter and presentation to the subcommittee to try and look at how to create that. I don't know if it's expressed the best way, and maybe we need to work on that a little more. One other thing which was potentially resolved, but I'm not so sure, is N113, which used to have a lot of directions about how to develop on hillsides, and it was replaced with something quite general. I guess my question here, and I don't have the answer, there were a lot of items that were included before, and now we have an ordinance to, this is N24 is the specific. Now, I guess we have an ordinance, but I don't know if all the items that are listed in the old policy N7 are included in that policy, and if they're not, we should look into what isn't and whether that needs to be specifically addressed and retained or not. There are things here about existing trees. So was that included? I don't know. That's a question more than an opinion on that one. One of the things that I asked to add, and I know it's problematic for some construction projects, is that during the nesting season, which is February through August, usually the requirement is for new projects to do a nesting bird survey. So if you have a new project and you're going to remove some trees, you'd go and look that you're not removing a nest while it's active. And I think we should look at widening that to also structures, other vegetation in the ground, because a lot of birds in this area nest in bushes or on the ground, not only in trees. And I would also look at projects that are not only new construction or new CEQA projects, but just other types of projects. And we can think about which ones it would apply to, because obviously not anyone who wants to do a little trimming on their tree is going to do a bird survey. But I think it could be stronger.
Thank you. Elaine, do you want to say anything? Go ahead.
So I think on your point, Arthur, about the different types of creeks, the rural creeks, suburban creeks, and channelized creeks. This was actually some feedback that I had mentioned in the first subcommittee meeting with sustainability and the natural element, which just in looking at section 2, goal N2, conservation of creeks and riparian areas as open space amenities, it just naturally assumes that you're talking about creeks as the sort of like natural rural creek condition, when we know that in Palo Alto we have several different types of creeks. And I think some clarity and some definition around the different types of creeks. So maybe there should be a restatement of goal endpoint 2 to clarify that there are several different types of creeks, maybe some definitions, and then maybe the policies, and I think there just needs to be different categories of policies with respect to the different types of creeks, and I think we can just augment that. I also, this is again, and just kind of, I know we're going to talk about the safety element a little bit ahead, but I think a lot of what we've been talking about with the habitat corridors and the pollinator pathways, and I really like Jennifer's suggestion about using those channelized creeks as, potential infrastructure, green infrastructure, and habitat ecological infrastructure. We've now separated infrastructure and put that in the safety element apart from the natural environment element. But there, as we know with climate change, a lot of really important new types of infrastructure, natural infrastructures that we should be considering. So again, this is we've split the baby, but in a way we almost need to kind of think about how we reference the different types of infrastructure, both constructed and natural, and maybe there's actually a natural infrastructure portion to the natural environment element. So I just want to offer that as some food for thought.
Thank you. Bonnie?
Yeah, I just want to thank Shani for bringing up what Sierra Club was proposing, and I totally agree with all that. I'm just suggesting that we be more specific in that open space section as to what types of things we're talking about, just in our language, and that maybe we have to look again at what we said in the community services part about parks, because you think about Olmsted's concept of the parks being a string of pearls in a city, the way he designed parks in Seattle and other places. So we may start thinking of our parks that way, and using the creeks or whatever as a way to connect. I don't know. That's really future looking, but something to think about. And so thanks, Srini.
It's in the parks master plan. So I don't know how well the community element integrates with the parks master plan, but the parks master plan has all these connectivity corridors, and the urban forest master plan has them. So to put them together, you take some of the park master plan policies, some of the urban forest master plan, and you put those together. That's why it needs to be in the general plan or in the comprehensive plan, so those two plans can come together.
So firstly, there was a comment earlier about whether or not there should be a requirement for new street trees as part of new construction. That's an easy time to put them in. So I do agree that if there are missing street trees, if it's missing street trees, I'm not saying we should put them in if they're not missing, but if there are street trees that are needed to fill in the canopy, especially in South Palo Alto, and even other places in North Palo Alto, commercial areas, I think that adding street trees has value, and doing it at the time of new construction and adding irrigation to it, the capability for irrigation is really easy to do when you're doing new construction or major remodeling. So I think that makes sense to me. I think that we should think about the idea of, in terms of channelized creeks and a riparian corridor near it. I believe that there are setback rules as part of commercial and residential development, and I wonder whether those setback rules are sufficient or whether we need more than those setback rules, because there are backyard and side yard setbacks, and so maybe we need more for the side yard, because backyard I think is already 20 feet. And for side yards, it's only 6 feet. So if the side yard is adjacent to a creek, maybe we need something more like that. Again, if that's the case, then you may need to have some relaxation on the street side in order to be able to have increased setback against the creek. I think we also need to be concerned with the idea that if you're doing basement construction, you're creating an underground dam, and water flows from the hills in the shallow aquifer down to the bay. And if you are, I guess we're in the dark. If we are creating a, if we're basically building underground basements and such, it may create a dam effectively underground dam for the aquifer. And I don't know what that means in terms of the eddies behind it, in terms of the water flow for the aquifer, what that does in terms of water flow behind it, and what it does in terms of what with the water coming up in front of it. In front of this, where that water goes and what happens. So I think that needs to be considered in terms of the structure of basements, in terms of how they're set up in such a way that that's managed appropriately. I don't know how to do that, but there are people smarter than I who can think about that. Finally, I noticed that there are two kinds of ways of trimming trees. There is the trees being trimmed that are street trees for the purposes of managing their shape and life, and that's happening every 7 years, plus or minus. And then there are the trees being trimmed for utilities, which is bastardizing trees, if I could use that word. They are basically doing an abortion on those trees. While some people would like to make abortion illegal for humans, I think we should think about not doing abortions on our trees either. And we need to think very carefully about how utilities trims the trees for line clearing. They need to do a much better job of that. I've seen some of the pictures of some of those trees, and it is a horrendous job. We need to do a much better job of that. Also, I think that sometimes trees die. In fact, I can talk about the case in front of my house. There was a tree that died in front of my house. They took it out. The city refused to put one back in, and they refused to take away the stump. And the reason is because it was too close to the water line. So the water meter is right near there, and they refused to put one in. Well, there was one there before. I think that maybe the choice of tree would be there, but in some sense, what's interesting is I'm in a roll curb, so there's a fence between me and the city part. That's where the tree was. I can, if I choose to, put a tree in exactly the same spot on my side of the property line, which will have the same impact on the water meter and all that kind of stuff, but the city won't do it. Something is crazy about that. In fact, I'm thinking of putting a tree there because it turns out it's where the street comes in, it would be a great focal impact for the end of the street. So I'm thinking of putting a tree in there, and I've been thinking about that for a while, but the city refuses to put one in. What? Yeah, at Oak Place. Actually, the arborist who told me what kind of tree suggested a cathedral oak would be great at this location because it has a nice. Well, Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so we're going to take a 5-minute break, and then we're going to continue on with safety. Thank you. Yes. Oh, you want to speak before? Okay, sorry. I didn't realize your tag was. Before we take a break, Mark had his tag up. I didn't realize you put your tag up. Sorry.
I just wanted to follow up on the dewatering. A lot has been mentioned about the basements and stuff. We're talking about the undergrounding of Caltrain. That's going to be a major dewatering program and a dam below ground. So I don't know how we're going to be addressing that.
Thank you. Did you have anything else to say, Bonnie, or does that residual tag? Okay. Anyway, okay, thank you very much. We'll take a 5-minute break. So let us start again, and we'll start with the safety element, and again, we'll start with staff comments.
Thank you, Arthur. So the second element that we're looking at tonight is the safety element, and this element has had 2 CAC meetings and also 2 subcommittee meetings to review the element. And as with natural environment, we were also joined by some departmental specialists from other city departments at our last subcommittee meeting, including staff from the Office of Emergency Services, the IT department, the Palo Alto Police Department, and the Public Works Department, briefly. So I think that this element, perhaps even more so than some of the other elements, has really made an attempt to consolidate and synthesize ongoing efforts that the city is making on a number of these kind of more specialized topics, and make sure that we're accurately reflecting really the robust set of programs and efforts that the city already has underway. And we've really benefited from the involvement of our subcommittee members in those efforts. So under goal S1 about community safety, we've added a little bit about not just personal disaster preparedness, but also business continuity and disaster recovery. We've made some fine tuning to the policies and programs about the emergency services volunteer program and our programs about emergency drills. We provided some clarity in the program about the real-time crime mapping. That mapping is currently available. It's not sponsored by the police department, but the crimereports.com uses data that is available from the police department. So we tried to clarify that wording in terms of the city's role there. We also worked on the wording of the programs and policy about collaboration with the Palo Alto Unified School District on both their physical facilities as well as disaster preparedness programs and education. And we spent some time in the meeting with the police department representative hammering out the language about what was originally a policy about body-worn cameras that has now been expanded to cover other possible technologies as those may evolve in the future. And to try to balance in that policy both civil liberties and protections for the community with ongoing federal law and case law and other contexts for privacy and transparency that are obviously important considerations here. And then just to note that bullying, which had been brought up, I think, at our last meeting here, is addressed in the community services element rather than in community safety. And terrorists, there was a couple of policy and program about terrorist attacks that were moved into this goal from, I think, the human caused threats goal. Looking at goal S2, natural hazards. We talked about the seismic TDR program, and that's currently being studied, so we kind of left the wording open. There's various possible ways in which that program could kind of evolve or be tweaked, so this is kind of left with those possibilities still open at this point. It's being looked at through the Seismic Risk Management Advisory Group. We did add a policy and a program about residential basements and their connection to potential flood hazards, a topic that's already come up here tonight. So this would prevent new habitable basements in single-family neighborhoods and update those basement restrictions as flood zones change over time. There's other policies and programs in this section that acknowledge that with climate change and other potential future changes, what is defined today as a flood zone may change. And we also added another program about, so related to that, about basement construction and groundwater levels due to sea level rise. Also, the policies and programs in this safety element are kind of in support of and consistent with the land use element program that we arrived at with this group to study the impacts of basements and consider additional regulations. So we're kind of tackling basements in the land use element, the natural environment element, and the safety element currently. The public works staff who was there suggested that might be useful to move drought from a natural hazard, which was its original location, to goal S4 under infrastructure. I think that's, again, that's I could see it going in either place, but that was the suggestion of the Public Works staff. And then we added and clarified some wording about the Stanford Fire Services contract and also some reference to the Office of Emergency Services. Under goal S3, this deals with human-caused threats rather than natural hazards. We added some of the wording from the CPI amortization ordinance resolution, not a reference to the site itself, again, in our keeping with our goal of trying to keep these policies and programs relatively broad. We added a program for protocols to reduce truck-related spills, a mention of smoking as a human-caused threat, and then also it's missing a bullet point, but I want to make sure to point out that we also added a new policy about monitoring research and studies on electromagnetic fields and sharing that information. And then finally, well, I guess we have two more here. Goal S4 under infrastructure. We added a program about addressing the potential impacts of sea level rise on the city's wastewater treatment plant. We talked about rainwater catchment and natural drainage sections. This was actually moved from stormwater. This is the one we've talked about earlier. Removed from stormwater section of the safety element to the natural environment element, and we touched on that in our earlier discussions tonight. And then finally just clarified the city's current restrictions on styrofoam and the expansion of the plastic foam ordinance in the solid waste section. The emergency management goal, we just broadened an existing program into a policy that was to implement the guidelines in the Utilities Department Emergency Response Plan. In fact, all city departments are required to have these kinds of emergency response plan, not only utilities. And this is really has kind of evolved into a policy that's more about ensuring continuity of city operations rather than being narrowly focused on one plan for one department. So those were our changes. Oh yeah, thank you so much. Okay, and then the other item that has come up since we sent this out to you guys is this issue of dam failure inundation. So you should have an App Places packet that looks like this. It's actually 2 pages, 1 page with text, and then 1 page with a map. So as we've discussed in our previous reviews of this element, the safety element is one of the 7 required elements under state law, and the state statute that governs safety elements has some specific things that safety elements need to cover, including fire risk and earthquake and geotechnical hazards and flooding. And then specifically it talks about various different types of flooding, and one of those types is flooding that can be caused from dam failure. So this topic is one that's specifically mentioned in the state statute. And it's one that we've covered in the draft DIR. And in the draft DIR, where it's also a part of the required thresholds of significance, we collected this data that's maintained by the California Emergency Management Agency on potential dam inundation areas. Excuse me, sorry about that. And that shows potential dam inundation areas from 2 dams that are on Stanford land, the Searsville Reservoir and Lagunita Reservoir. And the data is about 10 years old at this point. And what the draft DIR explained is that since that time, both of these reservoirs have really, or even before that time, have changed in their current capacity so that they're really holding considerably less water or even no water in comparison to what this map shows. So probably these inundation areas are pretty dramatically overstated, but this is the data that's publicly available from the state. So the city is just in a little bit of a awkward situation here because we do want to acknowledge and be responsive to the state statute requirements to address this issue of dam inundation, and we have this publicly available data that shows, you know, some parts of the city being susceptible to that as a risk. At the same time, in reality, we don't think that this is a substantial risk for the city, both because these reservoirs don't have much water in them, and also because there's really no record of dam failure in Palo Alto or in Santa Clara County So the draft EIR concluded that this is really not a significant risk for the city. However, in order to be consistent with state law, we're providing you with a new policy and a new program for your consideration to just kind of check the box on this issue. So this is another thing that we should discuss tonight. Probably this would go somewhere under goal S2, the natural hazards goal.
Thank you. So again, we have the safety committee. So if you were on the safety committee, if you could put your tag up. And I would suggest that next time that staff puts a memo at places that's from staff, that it should be labeled as such. It helps figure that out. That would be useful because it isn't labeled who's it's from. Okay, Annette.
Well, I'm fairly okay with the section, and most of my comments are really cosmetic, except for one. On the first page, there is this program S113, encourage residents and employees to participate in citywide emergency drills and other public education activities. And I also mentioned this at the subcommittee meeting twice. There's never, ever been a plan to involve residents and businesses. So rather than the wording that we have there, I mean, I think the whole thing could be eliminated personally, but I would say develop programs to involve residents and businesses in drills. That's much more appropriate. And I'm not sure what public education activities might be and what people are really thinking of that after being involved with this for a long time. That seems to be something that's very mysterious. Maybe it's social media, publicity about courses or events, etc. So I think that section needs a lot of rework. The rest of the stuff that I have is, again, pretty additive or just, again, cosmetic. I have a policy that after Know Your Neighbor grants, which is policy program S151, it says basically resident involvement in neighborhood safety programs, such as Know Your Neighbor's grants. It should also include the Block Preparedness Coordinator Program. And following that along in S153, encourage Palo Alto Schools, Unified School System to develop secure facilities and collaborate. Again, it should be with the Block Preparedness Coordinator Program or the ESV program. I guess I missed one. S115 talks about, that's the one that I wanted added, but it talks about, no, excuse me, I've got the wrong. S115. We talk about involving businesses. I think we should need to collaborate, got the wrong number on that, with the Chamber of Commerce. And rather than just talk about the city doing it all on its own. Again, I've got the wrong numbering on that somewhere, so I'll have to look that up. We talk in the natural hazards section on program S253. We talk about this has to do with funding to promote retrofitting of, and then we have a soft story construction. I think what we should have is a more generic word to use, seismically unsafe construction rather than just soft story. So I don't think, since there are many, many types of unsafe construction, and I listed some of them here with the number of building types, I'd like to see that be more generic. In the flood hazards policy S2.8, there, I'm almost finished. It relates to basements in the flood area, and it says restrictions. I didn't think there was any ability to build basements in the flood zone, so I'm not sure about that one. Policy 291, I think, should add the Baylands Master Plan. It talks about shoreline development, and I think there needs to be a reference there. And so the rest of my comments are minor.
Thank you. Hamilton?
I think this policy or this element is coming together well. My personal opinion is, with a little bit of cleanup from staff based on the minor comments from today, it's probably ready to show to the council. That doesn't mean we won't make any more improvements over time, but I think it's basically there. I totally agree with Annette's first comment on either removing S113 or modifying it. You have to be an emergency services volunteer to participate in our drills. We don't have something which is just open to the public without getting any training first, and I don't think it would help if you did not have training. Other than that, I guess the only thing that has changed since we worked on this is that we weren't really thinking about potential issues that could arise from federal government overreach. So there haven't really been any thought about that in there. But if you have any good ideas, we're totally open to them. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll start again on this end with Adrian.
So I agree. I think this policy, this whole section is coming together really well. Just a few small comments. So on policy S1.3, it says a multidisciplinary approach that includes a safe built environment. But I didn't see anything, and I was thinking that there's a lot of best practices in terms of urban design, buildings, and safe streetscapes. And maybe there's an area here for the city to start a program to explore safe cities design guidelines. A number of cities have done that in terms of street lamps, benches, doorways, alleyways, things like that. On policy S1.4, it talks about valuable crime analytics. Last time we spoke a fair bit about police body cams. I was just wondering, and I think San Jose recently implemented a policy where when the police are bringing on new software, new tools, they have to surface it to some commission or to the council just to let people know this is what we will be doing. There's been a bit of a scandal around something called, I think it's called Stingray, which is like a cell phone scanner thing that the Santa Clara County Sheriff tried to get, and then they got in trouble with the county supervisors. So we may want to bring a preview to the public before the police department adopts new technologies. And then I was a little, I know staff quickly mentioned it, on program S2.5.2, study the possibility of incorporating a sunset date. I just had a few questions about that, but I'll follow up with staff personally. Otherwise, I think this looks really good.
Amy.
Don't really have so much to add, except just very general about the power. So, like we know that there is a lot of just potentials for harvesting solar power and about installing the solar panel and then maybe the new technologies of a better use of the solar power, and that could be something that we can consider in addition to the power lines. That's kind of my wild dream. Really nothing concrete. Thanks.
Lydia.
The only thing I have over here is what Fred Balin and Ed Schmidt had said about the toxic over at College Terrace. And I think in our program over here, all the policy S3.2 and policy S3.3, I think there needs to be an extra policy in order to ensure that we do address, that the city does address contaminated sites and identifying it so that we are aware of where the water is going and where the contamination is heading, especially now that we have TC identified as a carcinogen. And so I think we should have another policy in there specifically stating that the city does require, whether it's the landowner or whether it is the city, there needs to be identification if it is something important enough for the city to ensure the health of its citizens. Thank you.
Thank you. Shani.
Thank you. I don't know if it's the nature of this element or it is a little heavy, but 90 programs is really expensive. And and I don't know if there's a way to consolidate some things that have to do with education, outreach. Potentially, some of those can be put together. Not sure. It just seems to be a lot of them, and it may be the nature of this element, but it's a little of concern. I would actually like the idea that was expressed, maybe Bonnie said that we need to take all the water issues and put them together in a separate element rather than have them all sprinkled all over the place, whether it's flooding, basements, taking care of things during drought, all of that. I really think we need to have a separate section and start looking at that together, because everybody had comments about water issues, and part of it is because you can't find your way around here. And some of it, things that were said, were addressed one place or the other, and many were not. And until we see them all together, we won't be able to say really what is happening here. There are a few things. I'll give you an example. Under drought 413, it talks about a new set of development criteria for water conservation. I think we just went through that. Not sure we need a new one. I don't know. Maybe we do. But I think that needs really to look at the entire city goals and policies and everything else, and not just be under drought if it's going to impact a lot of other things like taking care of trees during drought. I'm a little concerned about policy 4.3. I'm not opposed to providing, we have to provide regional water quality control services, but if we're going to accommodate projected economic and population growth, we have to look at other cities that use our treatment plan, and that can be quite intensive. I mean, it's not only Palo Alto that's going to grow. If we look at what Mountain View is doing and they're fitting into our plan, then we need to be a little concerned about what does that mean for our city and for the future of this area. And can we grow forever? Do we have that capacity in the future? So that's something to look at. Separate irrigation, I'm on policy 4.5. Separate irrigations that can accept recycled water for irrigation of landscape in large developments. I think it's a good idea to irrigate plants with recycled water, but we have to what we're seeing everywhere that they try to do that. Native plants don't do well with high salinity water that comes out of our treatment plant. On the other hand, if you have recycled water, there is no need to minimize use. You can use a lot more water and support different types of plants. So we need to maybe think about what are we using and what do we need to save and what we could have a lot of and we don't need to save. If we're going to have a lot of recycled water, instead of throwing it in the bay, we could use that for more irrigation, and maybe we can support those lawns over at Stanford. I have one more under solid waste. We have 4 programs, 493, 494, 495, and 496. I think all of those could be consolidated into 494. I think it does all of those things and don't need to have so many. And this is an example of where we could potentially look for consolidation of things. There is some repetition. Thank you.
Shani? Sorry, Doria?
So I was going to mention the solid waste programs that they could be combined, because I thought there was some redundancy across this element, and I won't go into all the details, but in community safety, earthquakes and geological hazard, fire protection, and emergency management all emphasize education and outreach programs, and I don't think that maybe they need to be everywhere. Maybe you guys thought that was important, so that's fine if staff and the subcommittee thought it was important, but I think that added to the large group of programs. And then recognizing what the members of the public said about hazardous, crap, I can't see, and Lydia mentioned this. So I think there's an opportunity here after policy 3.3, which is continue working with appropriate agencies to clean up hazardous waste sites and contaminated groundwater. I think that should just say hazardous materials, so it's wherever there are hazardous materials. And I think I think Fred Ballin maybe said that Palo Alto could establish their own standards and best practices for dealing with this, which might exceed the counties. But I also think there should be a program here that says something, and you guys would have to word this right, that addresses the responsibility of a property owner when hazardous materials migrate outside of their property into adjacent areas, and that it is a responsibility of that property owner to do testing, which I don't think is prohibitively expensive, and then any mitigation that would be required. So I would strongly like to see that as a program there. And this is kind of petty, but S 3.6, which is recognizing the secondhand smoke problems and supporting the smoking bans in Palo Alto, I would just like to see one of the requirements of the smoking bans is that in all the C zones there are designated and approved smoking areas that have to be approved, so they're not near anybody's front door, so smoke isn't drifting in. And I don't know if that's really happened much, or if at all. So I think an easy way to promote that and also promote the use of it by employees would be to have something up on the website, a map in designated areas, so that we could all know where those were and be really clear. If you live like I do adjacent to mixed use zone, this is becoming an increasing problem, and it's, most people are pretty nice when you ask them not to smoke 10 feet from your front door, but many are not. And there's a huge increase in litter because of this, because I guess people just kind of forget that cigarette butts aren't litter. So I would like to see something so we could track that better. And I think that's it.
Can I just add a quick clarification? I learned a long time ago the difference between hazardous materials and hazardous waste. I don't know if this is really accurate, but the way it was explained to me, hazardous materials are things you use. Gasoline you put in your car, cleaning products you keep under the sink, the chemicals that people use in industry, and hazardous wastes are things that you don't want. They've gotten away from you. They've spilled in the ground. They've affected the groundwater or the soil.
So maybe it's hazardous waste site.
Yeah.
Maybe it's the word site there
something
that
like
seems
that.
limiting or something,
Yeah.
but thank you.
Ellen?
Well, I'm particularly interested in public awareness, and interested enough that I went to the subcommittee that they had recently. And at the subcommittee, I was immensely impressed with the quality of the staff people who came to help at that time, and they were really outstanding, and I think they added probably a lot to the quality of what we're hearing today. But the public awareness part and the policies and the programs, I have been discussing with a lot of business owners and people who live in high rises and people who work in high rises that are in Palo Alto. And it became aware of the fact that this does not really recognize that the population of Palo Alto swells every day with people who commute here and they work here. And they have a swelling of the population that are employees, and many of these are, or some of them, are certainly not paid enough so that they can live nearby, and they commute long distances in order to come. And so the responsibility of the people who are the executives of these high rises, they're obligated to be concerned about their safety too, and how do you get them home when there was an earthquake in '89? How do you get your employees on the way to some place that is safe and sound there? And it's the job. And now I happen to live in a high rise. It is on the 8th floor, and it's just dawning on these people on the 8th floor that the only way to evacuate in the times of a really earthquake, for many of them, is to jump and that's it. And this comes across you. This is a fact of where I live and where I work. And so I'm very interested in this part of it. And what Annette just said about that program, S1.13, encouraging resident and employees, et cetera, in that whole section, that was the only reference to employees, which were really a big part of our daytime population and our obligations to them. So I would like that expanded exactly as Annette has spoken about, and I know they're very conscious of it, and they're active with that in the fire department and so forth. But it needs work, and they also, you have to understand that a lot of these employees have cars here too. And so if you are down in a program where you want to offer the public opportunity to buy emergency disaster kits and supplies, and I think that's a splendid idea, you buy them for your home and you buy them for your auto. The auto is what's going to get you home. I have one final comment, and it's really an important one. The emergency management, which is at the bottom of your table of contents, that belongs up there under the right following community safety. Move it up top because it is the management of the people that you are, programs that you are trying to save. So I just move that to the top under one and renumber it as you please. So thank you.
Mark.
I'll pass this time.
Okay, Alex.
I just wanted to say, as a resident, I guess we all are, I really appreciate, I get a ton of emails about preparedness. And I don't know who's behind all these, but if people do not go to these and prepare themselves, it's their own fault, because Palo Alto is way on top of that, more than any place I've ever lived. One thing I have concern with, and I thought about in policy S14 having to do with the analytics, a concern I have is that I've been participating and getting notices from stuff like Palo Alto Online. When crimes are committed, I get that there's a certain way they want to put the word out to alert the community. But I've noticed that sometimes when they're even saying they've captured someone, they include a photo. And the photo will kind of give the race or ethnicity of the person. And I've been concerned over time that this is going to create even greater divides and racial concerns in this. And so I realize where that might be important if we're trying to capture somebody. But I've wondered if there's some way to, on these analytics that we're doing on S14, that there's a way to be sensitive to or to figure out how to not to deepen the divide between people. And I guess that's one of the concerns I have, just in how those analytics are used in my experience on Palo Alto Online. The second thing was I noticed there wasn't much in there about identifying where elderly and special needs people living alone are living. I wondered if it would be helpful, and it was actually very related to more neighborhood ideas I had. I wondered if there was a way the city could even utilize existing programs like nextdoor.com or some digital neighborhood connection to help neighborhoods identify and then own people who live in their areas. I realize that's very complex, but I realize I don't even know who either, we use the term shut in. I'm sure that's a kind of a negative, a pejorative term, but there are people living alone and who don't have help and who would need it, and how would we get that identified? But for the special needs and the elderly community. The last thing, or the other thing was, I just wanted to say on S151, I think in the whole building community element of, I think, community safety, one thing that was really effective in our neighborhood was the whole block party thing. There was a time when the city was giving you money to throw a block party, and I just wanted to say, they still do? I heard there was a time where it ran out or something, and then there was a gap. Oh, okay, well, I missed that email. I think that could be much more publicized and utilized. I think it was utilized just to have fun, but I wonder how to connect the block party idea to community awareness, because I just wanted to highlight one thing. It's been 27 years since the big earthquake, the Loma Prieta quake. probably more than half the people that live here now and who have moved in here have no idea what an earthquake is like. And I've realized you cannot communicate to someone what an earthquake is like. If you have not been through one, it's unbelievable. And I don't know how to prepare people for that. But I think we should think about that, because we have a lot of, I've lived in California, been through 5 of them, and now I feel like ready. But most people who haven't, it really freaks them out. And I don't know how we prepare for the new population. It's also been 18 years since the big flood. Wasn't it 98 when that happened? And I don't know that people who've moved in, again, in that span are really aware of that. And so, given that these are 2 big things that we deal with in this area, how do we make our current population aware of the reality of those?
I think Annette would like to add something to that.
I'd just like to respond to Alex. Well, first of all, you would make an absolute fantastic emergency service volunteer. You've just hit it right on the head, so we're signing you up immediately. I did want to respond to the comments about people with special needs. And a long time ago, the city used to keep a database about this, and they have, somewhere in the late 90s, they chose to eliminate this for liability reasons. And so when you start thinking about identifying people, they don't want to be identified, and there are some legal and social ramifications. However, that being said, one of the things that this structure that we have in place in the city is for every block to know within their block who really has special needs, whether it be someone that doesn't speak the language, small child, animal, et cetera, to the kinds of needs that we think we might have with, oxygen dependent, deaf, blind, et cetera. So we're going to sign you up, Alex. Okay. Thanks for bringing it up.
I'll just add to that. When the grid goes down, you're not going to be using electronic resources to find out who has special needs or who's elderly or things like that. So you better make sure that those things are offline. To the extent that there's a potential for grants to be able to provide databases that can be used to maintain it and then print them out on an offline computer, that may make sense. But in any event, the issue is you don't want that online during an emergency. Jennifer.
I also think that this element has come along really nicely. I only have a few comments. The first is I agree with the public comment and others about the hazardous waste. I think we should be dealing with it where it's found, not just in designated sites. And similarly, policy S2.7 changes the old policy from minimizing flood exposure in flood-prone areas to only FEMA special flood hazard areas. And I think we should revert to the original. I think the FEMA special flood hazard area, that's just one of many FEMA flood zone designations that lie within Palo Alto. And it's the one where risk to property is sufficiently high that private flood insurance is mandatory. It seems to me that we would want to protect everybody in all the areas we know are prone to flood, and especially those who are less likely to be insured against the risk. So I would like to revert to the original language in that policy. Lastly, in the staff report on page 10, the last bullet talks about a CAC member had proposed a program to minimize floods in areas with high groundwater levels by avoiding removal of water retaining soils for underground construction. And that was rejected on the grounds that there was concern it might limit excavation for desired types of development, like low-income housing, like senior housing, like parking, who knows what, that there may be development that we really want, and we don't want to block it and make it impossible because of this. But at the same time, it seems to me, why would we want to exacerbate the flood risks in the very areas that we want people to live? So there's something inconsistent to me in that justification, and I'd love to see some inclusion of the concern, maybe with different language that is less prohibitive, maybe something like scrutinized development in those areas with high groundwater levels for increased flood risk due to removal of water retaining soils, something to that effect that highlights the concern and creates an opportunity for review so that, yeah, if there is a much greater risk of flood in those areas due to underground construction, maybe it's not worth building housing in that spot, or maybe, I don't know, parking. I think that it's an idea that ought to be incorporated somewhere. And that's all. Thanks.
Elaine.
So I just have a couple comments. Stormwater management, I like that there's thought and thinking around developing and implementing a green stormwater infrastructure. This is program S4.6.1, but as my earlier comments, just want to go back to that, which is that this is a really good opportunity to link back to some of the discussion on goal N2 and the creeks and the riparian corridors and the different habitat corridors and pollination pathways and things like that. I think making a reference back to those, again, I'm trying to figure out how to create linkages between elements because there's so much, so many different sections that kind of intersect with each other. And so I'd like to see some reference back to some of the discussion in the natural natural environment section. This is also a really good opportunity, as Adrian pointed out earlier, with complete streets and street pathways, just to think about streets as the green stormwater infrastructure, along with the street trees and the habitat formation opportunities. And then then the other thing that I just want to point out is on the point of trees and cutting trees, trimming them back and things. For power, I've been told, and I don't know if this is necessarily true, but I do see this in my own neighborhood, that oftentimes trees need to be trimmed because the power lines interfere with them. And so in order to keep those power lines clear, you have to keep the tree canopy back a certain way. So we have a program here, continue citywide, this is for S4.16.3, continuing citywide efforts to underground utility wires. So there's a lot to think about with respect to the design of streets. Arthur's right that there is an opportunity to put trees, maybe put tree wells, in front of the rolled curbs, but then you also have to think about where the utilities are going. So I think there's an opportunity to, rethink our streets, rethink the infrastructure that goes within those streets, as well as all of the green infrastructure that we've been talking about. I don't think any of the sections in this whole comp plan really integrate all of those things very well yet. So I just want to, this is one of many places, but I think it's worth calling out the opportunity to integrate the green infrastructure, to integrate the electricity, integrate the water management. I mean, really, we've kind of separated out our infrastructure over the 20th century, but I think with a lot of the new challenges facing climate change and the design of our redesign of our communities, and especially with mobility, as mobility opportunities change, we might have a way to redefine our streets and redefine the main corridors and really make those both parks and utilitarian areas, but also really beautiful gathering places. And then I also just want to throw out, and I don't know if the community services element has this integrated, but it seems to me that parks are a very important part of the emergency management strategy. And so I don't know, maybe the parks master plan kind of alludes to that, but it seems to me that there's some connection that could be made, because those are the natural gathering spots. Those are the natural sort of points for people to, exit safely, that there could be some thinking about those as community hubs and real resources and, places for important infrastructure in the event of an emergency.
Julia.
I just have a couple real quick things. Program S131, I'm really uncomfortable with the way that it's written. Coordinate with the police department, human relations commissions, and local social service nonprofits to develop a strategy for identifying, intercepting, and assisting potential offenders before crimes occur. It just has a large potential to be profiling of certain types of people. I really don't like it, and I think it needs to be rewritten or taken out. Program S162, just in general policy, S16 I think is great, and I really like it. I agree with Adrian that maybe we should look into, when we have new tools, previewing them to the public, and along with that, perhaps we should be including, obviously not all weapons, but certain weapons, military grade weapons, that our police force is considering. And third, I very strongly agree with Alex. I feel the same way when I get those notices, especially for crimes that have already occurred and someone has been captured. It just feels like the use is more gossipy than safety, and so I was thinking about that in program S141 with the making data available, making maps and things like that. I think it's very important that we're considering, what type of prejudices we can be adding when creating those things, and safety should be the only thing we should be considering. If the special needs, if that's something that we can't do, I see that those people who are, I don't know the correct word for shut-ins, don't want to be found. I get that, but if there is a way, it would be great. I know I used to live next to a man who didn't leave his house in the 4 years I lived there, and I would worry about him if there was an emergency. And I'm sure many of us have people like that. And that's it. Thanks.
Bonnie.
Really good comments so far. I agree with what everyone has said. I have, while everyone was talking, I was thinking about a kind of a restructure. I have no problem with most of the content, but in order to get what Shani and I are concerned about, the water issues. I'm sorry, here I am. Okay, so here's my idea. I would move drought back to natural hazard, because that's what it is. I would move the solid waste to human caused hazard, because that's what it is. And then the first goal about infrastructure, I really think that could be part of the first goal, about goal S1, a safe community that is aware of risks, et cetera. And then you have the infrastructure that creates a safe community, and that can be right up in front. And I agree with what Ellen said about putting emergency management up in front of this community, the whole safety element. And then that leaves, under the whole section 4, water supply and safety, wastewater treatment, recycled water, and stormwater management as 4 pieces that relate to water and pollution and adequate supply of water. All those things could go with the water resources section and natural environment element. So I think when you do that, then you'll look at all the different programs and policies, and you'll see a lot of redundancy and things that can be combined, and you'll have a much more streamlined document. So that's what I'm suggesting, and if I can share those details with you so you can play around with it. I don't know if the committee is meeting again, but something I'm throwing out, see if it works, because I think it would just make it stronger if we could not repeat over and over again, don't pollute our water supply. Don't throw bad things into the sewers, it's because you say it about 14 times in this thing. Oh, I didn't count exactly, but And that's all my comments. Thank you for a good job.
So water element, that has a nice ring to it. Dan? No, a water. But actually, there's culturally there's this concept of a water element.
Air, fire, water.
And then Palo Alto. Two things. First, I was looking for some mention of the El Camino water reservoir for fire, as well as reference to the various infrastructure wells. I don't know if they should be mentioned in here, or if they were to be mentioned, if they'd be under fire protection and awareness, or if it's necessary because it's covered more completely or more appropriately someplace else. I will leave that to you. My other comment is very similar to Co-Chair Keller's, which is under wastewater treatment, a program that studies the recycling of wastewater into potable water sources. either for emergencies or for any other purpose, like not having to draw out new water from the Hetchetchee. But in any case, those were two thoughts.
Thank you. So I was going to say that, so I don't have to. There's situations where there are unnecessary superlatives. Let me give you an example. In S4.14.2, it says establish criteria for the installation of maximum security telecommunications technology in new local government projects. Well, first of all, whatever is maximum security today will not be maximum security tomorrow. And secondly, the idea of a maximum security for anything other than a prison makes no sense. So you might want to say high security, but the idea of a superlative there is not appropriate. There's also mentions of off-grid. For example, in 4.15.2, it says establish an off-grid Wi-Fi network. So I was wondering, what does off-grid mean there? Does it mean not on the electricity supply or not on the internet? Which are actually both useful things to think about, because if it's accessible to the internet, it can be more easily hacked from the outside. So selective connection to the internet actually makes sense, but that's not what you were thinking of. You were thinking of the idea that it is available when the grid goes down. That's not off-grid. That means that you have a backup system when the grid goes down. And you could do that even when the grid is up. For example, I actually have a photovoltaic system at home, and I'm unusual in that I have a battery backup system. So when the grid goes down, I have power, continuing to have power, but those of you with photovoltaic systems will not have power when the grid goes down, because it doesn't want to feed power back onto the grid to electrocute some utility workers trying to fix the grid. So that's a misconception that people have. With respect to, I agree with Jennifer with respect to FEMA flood zones. In particular, my understanding is the 98 flooded areas that were not FEMA flood zones. And so all the more reason people, if you are not in a FEMA designated special flood hazard area, flood insurance is dirt cheap and worth getting. In terms of smoking, there are some smoking establishments downtown which are located adjacent to residential areas, and the secondhand smoke considerably impacts those residential areas adjacent to those smoking concerns, and I'm not sure what can be done about that. With respect to flooding, I would be interested in seeing the potential for some program in which those people who are in special flood hazard areas, particularly from the bay, from the bay, who might be removed from the flood requirements for paying insurance by putting in levies, to have the levies funded by a bond issue or parcel tax from those sites. So that, for example, when you could defer payment of the parcel tax until the flood insurance requirement goes away. And this way, the flood insurance requirement is replaced by paying a parcel tax. And that's a good way. That could raise $4 million or more for the 2,000 approximate housing units that are affected by the tidal flooding. Right now, flood insurance is over $2,000 a year. So that would raise a fair amount of money that could be used to pay for that in an effective way. Hazardous materials. We need to think about this different ways. So there's hazardous plumes underground, which is one thing. There's hazardous materials that are in use. There's hazardous materials that need to be disposed of. But we also have, in the past, we had 2 sites in Palo Alto that had a high level of hazardous materials. One of those was the Regional Water Quality Control Plant. That had chlorine. That's been since phased out. The CPI has another high level of hazardous materials, which is now being phased out. The phasing out of this high level, and I'm not sure what the name of it is, but there's a technical term for this high level of hazardous materials, that phasing out and elimination of a high level of hazardous materials should be a policy in the comp plan. Okay, and I don't believe that the notion of phasing out this high level category of hazardous materials is in the comp plan in the way, as explicitly as it should be. In addition, there's no mention of biohazard materials. And I believe it's called Biohazard Safety Level 4, I believe it's called. I may be wrong. But there's a very high level of hazardous materials that are biohazard, and I think that Palo Alto should prohibit any storage of high-level biohazard materials in terms of research and within the city. I don't think there are any now, but there's no prohibition against it. We do have some biotech industry in town, and I think that that's worth including. Couple of other things along here. I think it might be interesting to think about a program to encourage blocks or neighborhoods to do a mass purchase of foundation bolting. So if you live in a neighborhood where your houses were built in the 50s, your foundations are inadequate to be bolted, it costs money, much more money to do that house by house than it does to hire somebody to come the entire block and just whip through all the houses in there, bolt them down. It's much cheaper to bolt in bulk. Also, there is a location in which there is fracking in Santa Clara County. The city may wish to weigh in on that, particularly since fracking in South County is not that far away from the San Andreas Fault, and that's a potential cause of earthquakes. We don't want that fracking to trigger an earthquake, which will affect us. So that's where the connection is. A mention of Palo Alto Unified School District is useful, but somewhat inappropriate exclusively when we are dealing with the fact that Monroe Park is not in the Palo Alto Unified School District. So there should be some mention of referencing the school districts that they are in, which I believe is the Los Altos School District and the Mountain View Los Altos High School District, because that's where they are, and that's a part of the community. I'm not sure how you handle that, whether you have to handle that throughout or some blanket statement or whatever. Finally, two things. One more thing. One of the things, I'm not sure whether this is appropriate or not, but I don't remember seeing any mention of traffic safety. And maybe that's all within the transportation element. But that gets to the issue that I want to talk about, which is that right now this document is in the form of a written document. And essentially looks nice on paper, but it is not a very useful document on the web, which it will be more likely accessed. And I would like to see, once the comprehensive plan is completed, the idea of making it into a web-friendly document with indexing and cross-references and all that kind of stuff. And I don't know if that's within the scope of what ClaceWorks is helping us with, but that may be something that should be added at the end to basically make this into a living document that's much more useful and can be maintained and accessed. And then you basically avoid the problem that if something is in one place and not another, you can cross-reference it and find it. Talking about things that are cross-references, I will mention this again, and that is there are certain things which were moved from one element to another. We should have a list of all those things which we said would be moved and make sure they actually got moved. And if they didn't get moved, we should identify them and figure out why they didn't get moved, or maybe put them back where they were. And do that explicitly, because I know that there are some things which we said, oh, we'll move it, and then when we asked to add it back in where it got moved, it didn't get moved because there was not that will to add it back. And I think that if it was there and we didn't explicitly decide to remove it, we should keep it. That being said, and is there anybody else? I guess we do have some more. So we'll start with Hamilton.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut in front of you guys. I just wanted to go through and answer some folks' questions that brought up. I thought Adrian brought up a good point on, and there is actually language that exactly addresses your concern in program S162. The last sentence says, ensure transparency by communicating new equipment, implementation, usage, privacy considerations, and retention of data. Now, this was just added in the last revision. The next one, I do agree with Shani that there are some opportunities for consolidation. I really like the fact she actually gave us some examples. We actually didn't put in most of those education things. Those were put in by staff. So just trying to squeeze out of that one. Ellen, there is a program that addresses your concern about business. It's program S115. And chatting with Annette while you were talking, we thought it should reference the Chamber of Commerce. And it says disaster recovery plans, but as Annette pointed out, if we remove the word recovery, it becomes more general. And I think more addresses what you were discussing. 4, on profiling, I too, like many of us, am against profiling, but I have been to the police crime prevention class, and they actually tell you how not to profile. Like they tell you it's suspicious behavior, here's how you secure your house to prevent crimes, here are things you can do to, try and minimize crime in your neighborhood, but it's really more about just how do you make your house safe and not calling them when it's not something that should actually be called about.
I just think that then we should better identify that. I don't think that
So
when
crime
this was
prevention
written that
is-
it was written to racial
Right.
profile or with any ill intent, but I think we could better define it to make sure that it's.
Absolutely, I agree. There's opportunities to improve the language. And just remember that crime prevention is an important part of the police education program. And number 5, Arthur, there's been a lot of talk. Len Matterman's always talking about this. We'll create this parcel tax to fund the levies. And I just don't know if there's going to be a whole bunch of neighbors that say I don't want to pay the extra tax. So I'm open to it. I would pay it, but I think it's not clear whether that'll actually work. And also, I don't know if it's the right place to put it in the comp plan. I think we should try it, but I don't know if the comp plan's the right place for it. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Hamilton and Julia. And Doria, you're next.
Just really quickly, I agree with Jen and with Arthur about the FEMA flood zones. And something I forgot to say earlier is that I think I wanted to bring up something about the 17.2, the new public safety building, which has nothing to do with land use and the public safety building or anything like that. But I've always thought there was kind of a missed opportunity in not spreading south and on both sides of the tracks some of the police activity out. We would never put all the fire departments in one place. So I wish there was something here about having satellite police departments, especially on both sides of the tracks and further south, which I think would be very helpful in a real true emergency. So that's it.
Shani?
There is a lobbying policy, S411, supports state and federal legislation encouraging the use of recyclable and recycled content goods. Everything we talk about would be nice to lobby for, and these days even more than ever. I don't know that we want to single out this one, and I would remove that. I know that stuff every year they go through what legislation is going on, and then they'll choose some things that we could have an influence. Fracking is an important one. There is so many. I just don't see why this one was singled out, and I don't even think it belongs here. It belongs in sustainability. I just think we should remove this. And I am uncomfortable with looking and identifying criminals before the crime occurred. I think that last piece about really should be removed.
Lydia.
So Hamilton, I just want to clarify when you said the word perhaps removing the word disaster recovery, is this pertaining to program S1.1.5? So I want to make sure that in this comp plan that there is a program that will address recovery, specifically simply because even in, for example, Ellen's high-rise building, there has to be a recovery plan after the preparation, after the emergency happening. So there has to be a recovery plan, and this might just say business continuity, but we also have to have recovery. And that's why I specifically brought that into it. Okay, I don't care how you want to word it and to satisfy what Ellen was saying, but we do have to have recovery in here. Thanks.
Annette.
Yeah, I wanted to address that particular question. If you look at the emergency management, which I think is dense, and could be consolidated, but I'm not going to argue with Ken Duker. There is some wording that I think is very appropriate that could be moved into that 115, which I think that needs really rewording. The city should really be collaborating with the chamber. The chamber has not been mentioned at all. And the wording that is used in emergency management, I think, would cover both what Ellen said and Lydia said. It's to mitigate, prepare for, respond to, and recover from. And if that wording got moved to this section in the area of maybe to this disaster recovery plans, which is really part of business continuity, I think that would go a long way to addressing what Ellen says and then Lydia. And of course, that's repeated twice in emergency management, 512 and 513. So just move that forward if you would, that clause, to mitigate, prepare for, respond to, and recover from.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak on this? Hamilton.
Yeah, now that I've actually read the language, I think the police put in S131. We didn't put it in, but it might be appropriate to take it out.
So you're preventively removing it. Perhaps maybe staff wants to make a comment about what our plan is for the December meeting, and then we can adjourn.
Goal at the December meeting. We will have another meeting of the Natural Environment, and we're sort of setting that date up with the Natural Environment Subcommittee at the end of November or the beginning of December. We are going to move forward and just make these revisions on the safety element and bring that back for final approval at the December meeting. And the Natural Environment, we also have planned to bring back for final approval in December. Our goal is to get these important elements done while we have the complete CAC that has worked with us for over a year on this. And so, but we also realize that it's going to be the holiday season and that some people who have worked really hard with us won't be joining us and won't be staying on with us in January. So it's going to be a festive meeting. We're going to have nice food. Thank you, Hillary. And it's also earlier. It's the 13th. So we're kind of we're going to push pretty hard we're going to really make sure we're ready to take final action on both of these elements and to celebrate with you and to thank everybody for all the good work that they've done over this past year. So that's the plan.
So they'll see revised documents and narratives.
Yes, we'll see revised documents and you will see narratives for that meeting.
And
Yes.
what we'll do at that meeting is similar to what we did with the land use element. We'll capture comments. We'll have a week after for people to give any other comments. We'll package the verbatim transcript along with the element, along with comments made at the meeting to the council for them to review.
Yes, that's right.
Annette.
Well, I brought this up before, but I want to bring it up again. And next year will be a year of challenges. Besides losing some of the folks that can't continue on, Adrian and Lydia will be moving on to council, and Doria will be our planning commissioner. And so I think we, as a group, need to talk about the rest of the group and how we're going to proceed from here. I mean, potentially Doria might be still interested in being the planning, and I don't want to put words into her mouth, the planning and transportation representative replacing Adrian, but I think it would be difficult if we decided to add additional people. So I'm not sure how many people we have left. Maybe we need a council representative as well, since Adrian and Lydia both have so much information. But I think this is something that we need to think about, and I would like to get some sort of feedback at the December meeting.
Right, we will.
I think that's a discussion that the co-chairs will be having between now and then.
Just one more thing that Hamilton brought up, and I think I've mentioned before, it'd be really great to invite someone from the chamber to participate. I know they are very short-staffed, but I think it's very appropriate, especially as we move toward the business, to have them be here, and they could certainly have a liaison role as well.
Yes, currently we only have somebody representing Stanford, but having somebody representing the Chamber of Commerce does make sense. But excuse me, they need to be asked, yes. So. And I wasn't saying that just the co-chairs would talk about that, but the co-chairs with staff and potentially, so we'll figure out what to do there, and then we'll have to have another hurdle with the new mayor, whoever that turns out to be.
Huddle or hurdle?
Huddle, I guess.
Arthur, can I suggest that you also invite a representative from the TMA to your meetings too? They're the ones that actually, they're not active or funded yet, but you've got all the industrial, commercial people in one group. They're the only organization that represents them besides the Chamber of Commerce.
So the suggestion by Ellen was to have somebody from the TMA. I think that mainly addresses transportation and land use, which we've already addressed. So I'm not sure how much that they're representative of the business interest globally in Palo Alto. I think so. That's an interesting question. But we'll take that under advisement. Any other comments before we adjourn? Okay, then we are adjourned at 8:20, 10 minutes early.